Stay inside running fragment for now. We'll do pretty much all of the running fragment code at once. Do the same thing for the cycling fragment. So we've got our which will have all of our views inside it. So when the user clicks one of the records, they get a new activity, a new window where they can edit the record. But thinking a little bit about the user experience for when they move to the screen, at the moment in the title of our new activity, it still says the name of the app, Record Keeper. Okay, we're going to put some fields in here, some input boxes where they can type the record and save it and all that kind of thing. But rather than just the name of the app, it might actually be good if the record itself, the thing they're editing, was in the toolbar. Edit the 5-kilometer record, edit the marathon record, or something like that. And also it might be nice if there was a back arrow. It's quite common when you're in an activity that's on top of another activity or on top of another screen that you have this back arrow, and that kind of tells the user that they're not the home destination, they're somewhere a bit deeper in the app. They've drilled down a level. Arrow is an additional way they can go out of where they are. They can use the back arrow on their keyboard, but because they see the arrow in the top left, they can also go back that way. So a couple of things to do will be to have this toolbar title be dynamic, and we'll talk about what dynamic means in just a second, and also give them the back arrow, and when they click that back arrow, it will back out of the activity, it will go up a level to where they were previously. So first of all, on this word dynamic, it's a word you hear quite often in programming. So dynamic means, rather than a fixed value, a hard-coded edit record, which will be the same for every record, instead this title can be flexible. It can be different depending on the condition or the circumstances. So we have the ability for the title to be one of many values, and that value will be driven by what the user does. Dynamic, flexible, determined at runtime, determined by some other conditions, the opposite of hard-coded. So you hear this word dynamic quite a lot. Whenever you hear it, it's referring to the ability for the data piece in our code, to be determined at runtime, to be determined as the user is using the app. Dynamic. So dynamic titles. If we just minimize the emulator for now and go to our code. So we can go now into our edit running record activity code. And one of the first things we should probably do is just straight away switch over to using view binding. Should be mostly a recap now. We'll go ahead and make a private late init var called binding, and we should know that our binding class, our generated code, will be activity edit running record binding. Quite long-winded, but it's just the name of the layout file in uppercase with the word binding at the end. So then after the super.create, we can assign this binding equals activity edit running record binding dot, whoops, not the dot bind one, not the dot inflate one. Okay, and in activities, in the app activity class, we have access to a layout inflator that's always available to us. And because it's an activity, we just do the one argument method, the layout inflator, that top one there. We don't do the 3-argument one with the parent and attached to parent. That's for fragments. So now we have the binding class. We can simply set content view and pass in the binding.root. So there you go. In less than a minute, we switch over to using view binding. Fantastic. So now we set the content view. We have this window with our very simple layout. So it's actually possible to change the title, to hardcode change the title, by calling a title variable that is available to us in app compat activities. If you make some line breaks after you set content view, and just type the word title, and you can see this top one from getTitle/set title, we can use the same Kotlin property called title to either retrieve and or set the toolbar title ourselves. So if I go ahead now and use this title variable and decide it does something new, we'll just hardcode something for now. We'll say my new toolbar title. If I now go ahead and run this code, and when I click on a record, my new toolbar title. Fantastic. So we've discovered that we have the ability in code to manually change this title. So that's the first thing we need to know to be able to have control over the title at all. If I go back to the code, so now we need to have a little think. We're able to set the title manually in code, but this edit running record activity, this code needs to know which record launched it. It needs to receive somehow something that says I was launched from the 5-kilometer container, I was launched from the half-marathon container. So if we have a little moment to think, do we know the method, the way that we can pass values from activity to activity? And we have done this before. See if you can think what it is. It's to do with intent. So the answer is intent extras. We can add something to our intent. Our intent, which is like our envelope, saying, hi, please, find me this class, find me this screen, and launch and open it. Well, in that envelope, in that instruction to the Android system, we can pass with that envelope some extra bits of information, hence the word extra. So we can use the intent extras to pass some extra information, and then once we're in this edit running record activity, we can receive that extra, receive that bit of data, and then we can do some clever stuff with it to make sure we have a custom title and that we're updating the correct record. So first things first, let's go back to our running fragment and add that extra bit of information that we're going to need. So somewhere between creating this intent variable and starting the activity with the intent variable, we can add some data to this intent, to this envelope. So the way we would do that is we do intent, the variable itself, dot, I'm going to put something inside this envelope. We're going to put some extra data, so type the word put, and then it is extra, put something inside the envelope. And as you can see, the first value is a name, the name of this extra, the identifier to be able to retrieve it, and then it takes all sorts of things, ints, bytes, characters, longs, floats, strings. We even saw before we can make a serializable class. We can actually put a whole class, a whole object full of data. But for us, it's going to be completely sufficient to just have a string that tells us what the record is. So you don't have to choose any one of these in particular. In fact, you can just type put extra manually into the brackets. So 2 arguments, 2 parameters. The first is the name of the record. So I'm going to call this distance. After all, we have 4 different distances from 5 kilometers all the way through to marathon. So it'll be good enough for me to identify this as the distance. So we'll do distance as the name of the extra, as the identifier, and then we'll put some sort of string. Now right now in this launch running record screen method, we don't have any variable that says what the distance is. So can you think how you would change this code to make it so that whichever container clicks on it, we're able to determine a specific string, a specific identifier for that container? Pause the video and have a go if you think you can solve this problem. These are the sorts of problems that as an Android developer you need to be thinking of and solving when given a piece of work or feature to add to an app. So the way we can do this, have all 4 containers call the same method, but determine individually what string it is, what's the individual record, is by adding an argument, a parameter to the method. So let's add an argument and we'll call it the distance with a lowercase, and we'll make this variable this argument of type string. So now above we're getting 4 errors because we're not giving anything to this method, so we can simply type in a value, and we can make it a user-friendly value, the value we want to show the users who are playing with our app. So we can simply do 5 km for the 5-kilometer one, 10 km for the 10-kilometer one, and then a nicely formatted half-marathon for the half marathon, and then marathon for the full marathon. So we have a launch running record screen method which has a distance parameter, and we're passing that argument in. Remember, argument A for the actual value, parameter for what's in the method. Okay, so we're passing in the individual distances. So now we can pass along this distance string. So I put in the word distance. So we're putting inside our edit running record activity intent, inside that envelope, an extra bit of information. The information is labeled as distance, and then we're giving it the specific distance, which we define here. So now in the edit running record activity, we can receive that piece of information. Later on, we'll look at tidying up our code, and we'll probably have it as here. An extra bit of information. information is labeled as distance, and then we're giving it the specific distance, which we define here. So now, in the edit running record activity, we can receive that piece of information. Later on, we'll look at tidying up our code, and we'll probably have it as a class variable as a property. But for now, we can just retrieve it directly just before we set the title. So let's do a new variable, a value. We'll retrieve it, and we won't change it again later. So it can be a fixed value, val, and we'll just call it again the distance. If you can go ahead and remember how to retrieve extras yourself, then please again pause the video and try and challenge yourself. But the way we do it is intent. We have access to the intent, one of the many things available in our app activity. So we can get the intent which started this activity, and then we can do .get, the reverse of put. But this time we need to know what is the type of thing we're getting. We can't just say get extra. We have to say what kind of thing it is, and we know it's a string extra. So get a string extra, and we get it by name, distance. Okay. Remember, I used a capital T. It is case sensitive, so it must match directly. So now we have this distance string. If I specify the type explicitly using Alt Option Enter, you can see it's a nullable string, but that's not a problem with the get string extra. If it can't find it, it will just return null. It won't crash. I'll delete the variable type. We don't really need that. Just thought I'd show you that. So now we can use a string template, and we can set a user-friendly title. So we can simply say the name of the distance and the word record, 5 times record, half marathon record, and that will tell the user what record they're editing. So we'll use the $sign and use that distance string, distance, then a space, and then with a capital R, record. Half marathon record, 5 times record. And that's all that we need to do to have a dynamic title, a title that will be determined by the user as they're using the app. So let's go ahead now and run this and make sure that our dynamic title works nicely. So when I click on the 5 kilometer record, we have 5 kilometer record in the toolbar. If I press back and do half marathon, we have half marathon record. Now just being consistent, I'm doing half hyphen marathon there, but I call the record half marathon with a capital M. So I'm actually going to go and change that. I like to be consistent. So if I just change that to half marathon, and I think I can do, not the left icon says run app, it will stop it and then run it again, but there's this apply changes. So because the app is running, we have two different ways we can launch it. We can launch it from a cold start, that's the one that's got a stop icon there, or we can do this one with an A, and if possible, it will try and rerun it without closing the app. So I quickly click that, I can see apply changes. Okay, that seems to have worked. So I think if you just click half marathon, yes, it's fixed it without having to restart the app. That sometimes works, it sometimes doesn't. It depends how destructive the changes you make. Yes, it's fixed it. Launch it from a cold start, that's the one that's got a stop icon again, but there's this up to half marathon there, but I call the record half marathon with a capital M. So I'm actually going to go and change that. I like to be consistent. So if I just change that to half marathon, and I think I can do, not the left icon that says run app, it will stop it and then run it again, but there's this apply changes. So because the app is running, we have two different ways we can launch it. We can launch it from a cold start, that's the one that's got a stop icon there, or we can do this one with an A, and if possible, it will try and rerun it without closing the app. So I quickly click that, I can see apply changes. Okay, that seems to have worked. So I think if you just click half marathon, yes, it's fixed it without having to restart the app. That sometimes works, it sometimes doesn't. It depends how destructive the changes you make are. If you just make some small changes in your code, you click this rerun icon with an A, and it will try and apply the changes without actually restarting your app, and that can be quicker. Okay, if it doesn't work, it will tell you it has to reinstall the app, in which case you can just stop it and run it fresh, or just click the left icon there. But I think I've talked about that before. It's good to know what these two different things do and the subtle difference between them. Okay, good. So yes, we are using a dynamic title, we're using an intent extra, so now the edit running record activity code knows what record it is editing. So the last thing to improve the user experience will be to give the activity a back arrow to tell the user you're in a deep level of the app, you can back out of this, you can back up to the main screen. And you might remember from previous tutorials, the simple way we can do this is by specifying a parent activity in the manifest. So if we go ahead now and open the Android manifest, and find the edit running record activity entry, which for me is at the top, and then just after the first attribute, the name attribute, but before the closing slash arrow, make some line breaks, and we can simply type parent activity name, and we can make the parent activity main activity. And that's a very, very quick and easy way to give us this back arrow behavior. So one more time, if I run the app, and now when I click the records, I have the name of the record in the toolbar, and I have the back arrow, which when the user clicks, takes them back to the main screen. So that's a pretty nice experience for diving into the place where we're going to edit our records. The user can get in and out easily, they can see which record they're editing, it's right there in the toolbar, and we've learned how to set titles in code using the title property, and we've even recapped about intent extras, passing the records to the new screen, and displaying that to the user. So this is a pretty good place to be. We've pretty much done most of what we need to do in our fragment code for now, but of course we've only done it in one fragment, the running fragment, so before going any further we should flesh out the cycling fragment with the same concepts. We've fleshed out the running fragment, if I just scroll to the left again, so we've moved the fragment over to view binding with a view binding variable, and we've set that up with a 3 argument called the inflate method here. Then we set up the view click listeners. We know to do this in the onViewCreated method rather than onCreateView, as you can run into problems if you do too many things in the onCreateView method. So we set up our click listeners for all of our records. We have one method to launch the edit record screen, and we have a separate activity for our edit running record activity. So we added a parameter to the launch running record screen method for the distance, our running record distance, and then we create the intent to move to the new screen, passing that distance variable as an extra, and then we start the activity. And then in our edit running record activity, we set the view binding, and then we retrieve that extra, and then we set the dynamic title. So quite a few things to do there, but put simply, it's set up the fragment view binding, set up the click listeners, create a launch running record screen activity method, and then creating a new activity, retrieving the extra, and setting the title. So about 4 or 5 things to do there. So this will be a really good mini challenge for you. Without any help from me, how much of that do you think you could do for the cycling fragment? If I just move over to the cycling fragment code, lots of little things to do there, but if you can give this a go yourself now as a mini challenge and just see how far you get, you can refer to all the code that you've just done in the running fragment and the edit running record activity. But if you can do all of that on your own, or most of that, that'll be a really good marker for how you're doing with fragments, how you're doing with intents and intent extras, and all of the core Android concepts that we've learned so far. So challenge yourself now and try and do all the changes that we need to make in the cycling fragment code yourself. If you get stuck, you can unpause, or you can just do your best and then check your answers afterwards. But I'm going to go ahead now really quickly and do all the things that we need to do. So then we have the code for our running fragment and cycling fragment, and the 2 new activities that we need fully set up, ready to go, ready to start saving and editing our records. So pause the video now. For those of you who want to check the answers, I'll just continue. Let's do this. So first of all, let's change cycling fragment to a v-binding class. So private, latent var, I'll call it binding, and it's fragment cycling binding. I'm going to delete the return line, and I'm going to assign the binding variable in my onCreateV method. So binding equals fragment cycling binding dot inflate. And I've got the inflator available to me. The container is now my biggest client. Finish. You can have a look at the app, have a play with it. And that is it. I've not checked my workings. I've not tested. That is it. I've not checked my workings, which is interesting to change. As you're getting better as an Android developer, I'm going to keep trying. We've also just seen there how it keeps. So just 2